Good evening, or good Arab Shabbos. So I'm going to take a little pause this evening and move away from the scheduled program, so to speak. And as much as I hesitate to do this, I want to address some of the burning issues, literally burning issues on the streets. Very, very painful week here in the United States of America. A lot of pain by people on the streets, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. And it's important for us not to ignore what's going on. It's important to us to pay attention to what's going on. And I'll just mention a thought with something that occurred after the horrific Pittsburgh attacks on a shul not that very long ago. The Jewish community, not only in Pittsburgh, but the Jewish community, around the United States was very traumatized. And, we weren't the same after Pittsburgh. We're probably not the same since. The notion that we can just go to a shul, go to a synagogue and pray and worship in peace, that was overturned very quickly for us here. And shortly after that, I got a letter from someone, a pastor, that leads a church in St. Augustine. And the pastor said, I feel the Jewish community's pain now, and I want to express my deepest condolences. So on that note, it's important to recognize what other communities are feeling their pain. And it's important to recognize that although it's not in our backyard, we must express solidarity with the community that is feeling pain, and with the African American community, of course, who we share the same society with. We have to remember, of course, one of the bedrock values in Judaism is that we are all created B'Tselem Elokim, in God's image. So I just wanted to open with that. And of course, there's a bunch of different side issues and law and order and the right reaction and military forces in this, but we can't, that's beyond the scope of what I'm here to talk about. Just want to talk about the theme this evening is how to listen and understand different and opposing views. Because a lot of times that leads to polarization where we're not able to do so. So what's broken out, wide out in the open this week, the raw emotions, divisions, but that's only one topic that's tearing society apart. Another prominent topic that's tearing society apart on all different levels of society, from the macro to the micro, is the issue of the coronavirus, of course. How much precautions to take, how little precautions to take, what's excessive, what's appropriate. People have different philosophies, people have different viewpoints, different governments have different viewpoints, different cultures have different viewpoints. Many times there's very little tolerance for other viewpoints. And people that don't agree with us exactly the way we're supposed to go ahead and have the reopening in society, people become alienated from one another. And of course, not to mention the polarization that exists along political lines. Of course, any election year, this is a reason for people to once again become divided because they sign up for different political beliefs or different candidates or different political parties. But it all seems a lot more tense this time around. So I wanted to focus tonight, not going to comment, on any of those specific issues, but just when you have a family member, you have a community member, you have a friend, you have a colleague, you have somebody that shares an opposing viewpoint. How do we not become alienated from one another? How do we not become so distant from one another? The second we see a sign in someone's yard, they're voting for that party, that candidate, okay, they're obviously on the wrong side. I'm already not going to have anything to do with them. So how do we go ahead, in especially tense times when emotions are running high, make sure that we we're able to go ahead and keep it together, both on the micro and the macro. So I wanted to go ahead and talk about a famous idea that's brought down by the Gaon of Vilna on the art of listening. Because listening is a very difficult thing. Listening properly and effectively to somebody else is much easier said than done. The Gaon of Vilna talks about there's 3 levels of listening. 3 levels of listening that a person should strive to go ahead and internalize, especially when it's somebody that disagrees with you. And especially when it's someone that disagrees with you on a very important topic. So the first level, says the Gaon of Vilna, the sage from Vilna, he said the first level in listening is actually to listen to the person, understand what the person, just let the person finish. Don't interrupt the person. You let the person finish their sentence as they're saying their viewpoint, which you vehemently disagree with. Let the person finish. Let them communicate their idea. Then you'll get an opportunity to go ahead and to communicate yours. That's the most basic. You tune in to what they're saying. Perhaps they have a point. Are we so afraid of opposing viewpoints? Are we so scared to hear an opinion that doesn't agree with us? Just hear it out. That's the first level, says the Gaon. And then the second level, he says, is understanding. Understand that person's position. If someone says something, ask a question. Do you mean to say, not in a challenging way, I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. You're present for the person. You're exhibiting not only the first level, which by the way includes appropriate body language, that you're present for the person, you're not tuning out, you're not already thinking how to respond, but you're actually listening. This is even a step further. You're asking a follow-up question. You're going ahead and trying to give the person the feeling that they're being heard. And then finally, after listening well and being present for that person and understanding what they're saying well, the third level, perhaps the most difficult level, is the level of accepting. Accepting means that I accept that this is your position. It's a valid position. It may be one that I disagree with. You may vote for one person and I may vote for the other, but I understand that and I accept that that's your position. It's important for us to remember the context of the polarization of society today, that people have different realities than we may have. And just because we're not familiar with the struggles that other communities may have. We have to accept that that is their struggle. Say it's right, it's wrong, it's wrong. We have to understand. But not only understand, we have to accept. Now, there's an important distinction here from the Gaon. He says accepting does not mean agreeing. You don't have to agree with that person. But it's important to go ahead and have that mutual respect. Excuse me. Even if we disagree with one another. So I want to go ahead and tell you a story that's documented here in Tanakh, a story that tells us about when people don't listen to each other, what can occur. So this is a well-known story, perhaps. You know the story, but it's worth revisiting in terms of the context of this discussion here. So the story takes place in Melachim Aleph, the book of Kings 1. After the death of Shlomo HaMelech, the death of King Solomon, there's a new king that takes the seat of the palace of royalty, and that is the son of Solomon. His name is Rechavam. Rechavam, as he's settling into his new administration, he gets a request from a delegation. And the request is something that we lobby our political leaders for today as well. You know, times may change, but not everything changes. And the request was, please lessen our tax burden. Please go ahead and reduce our taxes. And Rechavam said, give me 3 days to consider your request and come back to me. And says, the pasuk over there in Perek Yud Beis, in Melachim Aleph, chapter 12 of Kings 1, that Rechavam consulted with his father's advisors, the more elderly and the more senior advisors, and he consulted with the more contemporary advisors, meaning the younger guys, the ones his age. And it says first he consulted with the elders, and he said, the people are coming to me. They're asking me to go ahead and reduce taxes. What do you think I should do? So they said, it's important to listen to them. And then once you go ahead and reduce their taxes, they're going to become your loyal citizens. They're going to become so loyal not only to you, but to the country. And says the pasuk, they'll be servants for you all the days of your life. So basically the senior members of the advisors advised him to go ahead and listen to the people. It says afterwards he went to the younger advisors, his own contemporaries, and he said to them, the people have come to me and they've asked me to go ahead and reduce taxes. What do you think I should do? So the younger advisor says, it says in the pasuk, the children, the kids, the young generation. I don't mean this to say this in a derogatory note, but the millennials of that generation. We're talking about an ancient Israel. They said to him, this is what you should say to the people that spoke to you, saying, Avicha Hichbed Asulenu, went to the whole thing. And by the way, he said you should double down on them. Not go ahead and lighten the burden of taxes, but you shall go ahead and double down, increase their burden of taxes and their responsibilities. So he had two conflicting pieces of advice. His father's advisors are telling him, listen to the people. They're asking for a tax break. Listen to the people, his contemporaries, the millennials of that time were telling him, no, not only shouldn't you listen to them, increase taxes. So it says in the verse that he chose to go ahead and listen to his buddies, the younger people, it says in the pasuk, when he spoke to them, he said, he spoke to them as the young advisor said, my father increased the burden on you, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and double down on that. The following, so it says in the following verse, it says, the king did not listen to what the people were saying. Following verse, Pasuk Zayin, verse 16, states the following: a historical shift, a historical moment, an inflection point at that time for the Jewish people. Vayar kol Yisrael ki lo shama hamelech aleim. All of Israel saw that the king didn't listen to them. And they sent a message and they said, so what do we need this government for? What do we go ahead and need this for? And they went and they broke away and they formed their own kingdom, their own government in the northern Israel. 10 of the 12 tribes broke away, and from that moment on, there were two kings. There were two kingdoms in Israel. There was the Melech Yehuda, the Judean king in Jerusalem, and up in the Shomron, and from that time and on, there was the king of Israel. Interesting to note, anecdotally speaking, the United States began as a nation, as a republic, also over the issue of taxes. The people back then in the colonies said, taxation without representation. So they fought back. This has, the story of how America began has a lot of similarities with the story how the kingdom of Israel began after it broke away from the kingdom of Judea. But the point I want to make, what the rabbis point out from this story, it doesn't say they broke away because ultimately he decided against them. It says in the verse, Vayar kol Yisrael, all of Israel saw ki lo shama hamelech alehem. The king was so dense and distant. He wasn't listening. He wasn't paying attention to what they were saying. He wasn't listening, understanding, and let alone accepting. He wasn't doing anything in terms of listening to them. When you feel like somebody else is not listening to you, in that case, they felt the leadership wasn't listening, then they had to go ahead and form their own new path forward. It's not an expectation that the leadership has to go ahead and do whatever anybody wants, any citizen all the time. That's impossible. But at least, even if someone comes forward with an idea or proposal that is not viable, at least give them the opportunity to present the plan. Give them the opportunity to be listened to. And that is a crucial lesson that we have to pay attention to today. Because we live in a time, unfortunately, you say one thing on social media that someone may not agree with, that's it. We're alienated from one another. We're alienated from different groups. The first step in coming together, the first step in a society to heal, is to take the opportunity and listen to one another. And I want to conclude my remarks by saying we see this the most important declaration of faith in Judaism. Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hashem is our God, Hashem is. Why does it start off by saying Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel? Who are we talking to? Just make a declaration. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And the answer is because before we embrace the Lord, before we embrace HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem in our lives, before we embrace God, we have to go ahead and listen to one another. So we say, Shema Yisrael, listen, O Israel, I want to talk. And someone says to me, okay, you listen. I'll listen to you, listen to me. You listen to me in that community, I'll listen to one another. And then, if we do all that, we can say all together, in unison, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. So my friends, there's an extraordinary amount of pain. There's an extraordinary amount of division. There's an extraordinary amount of discord. And there needs to be a lot of healing. Healing between people of different communities, different cultures, different races, different backgrounds, even amongst our own community. There's always a diversity of viewpoints, and we can never let that divide us. But we have to realize that the first step to healing, the first step to unity, the first step to reconciliation starts with this idea of listening to one another. So much so is that our most fundamental declaration of faith begins with the word Shema. Shema, listen. So my blessing and challenge to us all is, let us have the courage to go ahead and start listening to other people. Let us have the courage to start listening to other communities. Let us have the courage to start listening and understanding and accepting, as the Gaon of Vilna says, people that don't necessarily agree with us all the time. And if we're able to internalize this message of listening, we have a path forward for reconciliation and unity. Thank you for listening, and I wish you all a very meaningful and peaceful Shabbos.